Hello, everyone. Great to have you here today with us. My name is Anthony Hopper, and I'm an Alumni Relations Officer here in the Trinity Alumni Office. And I'm delighted to have you here with us for this episode of our Inspiring Ideas at Trinity series. Today, we'll be hearing from pharmacist and motivational speaker, Jack Kavanagh, as he'll talk about workplace burnout and how to build resilience with Declan Treanor, Director of the Disability Service. Before I hand over to our speakers, a few practicalities to take care of. This webinar will last just under an hour. We'll take audience questions after the talk. To submit your question, simply use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We encourage as much audience interaction as possible. You're welcome to pop questions in throughout the webinar as you think of them. I'd also like to note that we're using Zoom-generated automatic subtitles for this webinar. If you'd like to turn these subtitles on or off, click the CC Closed Captions button at the bottom of your screen. Then click Show or Hide Subtitles. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on our Trinity Alumni YouTube channel. Now I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. Jack Kavanagh acquired a spinal cord injury in 2012, aged 20, leaving him with 15% muscle function. Choosing to see the injury as an opportunity to grow, learn, and reset his views on life. In the following years, Jack has challenged the limits of his situation. As a pharmacist and a speaker, Jack builds awareness of the value of health and well-being as drivers for performance, coupled with cultivating diverse and inclusive environments where people belong and are valued. Jack sits on the board of directors of the National Disability Authority and Centre for Excellence in Universal Design. He hosts the Only Human podcast and is well known for his acclaimed TEDx talk, Fearless Like a Child, Overcoming Adversity, and award-winning documentaries, Breaking Boundaries. He is actively engaged as an advisor to the World Health Organization in relation to digital and assistive technologies and progressing the delivery of health outcomes for people with disabilities. Jack loves an adventure. He is a keen hand cyclist, budding sailor, and can be seen online sit skiing down snowy mountains at speed. Our second speaker today is Declan Treanor, who is the Director of the Disability Service in Trinity College Dublin and is responsible for the strategic and operational development of the service. He actively promotes the disability service both internally and externally, acting as a disability expert advisor to the Provost and University Executive Group. Currently, Declan is overseeing the transition to the new Trinity Disability Hub in Printing House Square. This transition brings about exciting changes, including a new identity, which can be explored on the Printing House Square webpage. Overall, Declan's profile reflects his dedication to enhancing the disability service at Trinity College Dublin, driving transformational changes and actively engaging in various strategic initiatives that contribute to the overall well-being and inclusivity of disabled students at the university. I'd like to welcome now Jack and Declan. Thank you both for joining us, and I'll hand you over now for a very interesting conversation. Thanks.
Cheers, Anthony.
Thanks, Anthony. So, Jack, we've known each other for a very long time in your journey through Trinity. Could you maybe tell those who are here today who may not know your journey about that and what the adventure you took when you came to us and where you are now?
Absolutely. So it's a pleasure to join all of you here today. And I suppose, Declan, you're right. We go back. It's kind of amazing to think it is a few years now. It's about 11 years actually since I first entered into Trinity, and I engaged with you in my first year as a student with dyslexia and engaged with minimal sort of peripheral supports for that. But just before coming back into my second year studying pharmacy, I had to engage you with a whole host of new requirements after sustaining a spinal cord injury. And I took a year out of college, and it meant re-engaging in lots of new ways when I did come back. And getting back into the college environment was so important. You know, it was mentioned in the lead in there that my spinal injury was fairly significant in that I broke the fifth vertebrae in my neck, which resulted in paralysis and about 15% muscle function. And so in some way, shape, or form, I had to adapt how I engaged with almost every part of life. And there was significant support requirements when I came back to college, and the disability service was there with me every step of the way, and from getting on campus accommodation to personal assistance support and so on. But you alluded to the fact that I came back into pharmacy and it was a demanding program, and as it is for anyone. And over those couple of years, I suppose my perspective on it was I was getting, like many young people in the college environment, an opportunity to understand how to be independent in the world, and to figure out a little bit more about who I am as a young adult. And I was doing it whilst also in a very practical ways discovering how I could reclaim my independence personally, um, and grab the opportunity of being in that environment with both hands. And over those years, I suppose I had the chance to gradually reduce the levels of support in terms of personal assistance and so on. And I came through the pharmacy program and out into the world. I went to RCSI for the master's year. Um, and um, and then I engaged into the workplace, and we go out into the workplace and we often think that we have it all figured out when we get to the end of college, and you realize that you're largely incompetent when you get out there, and that you're really starting from scratch all over again. And I had that sensation numerous times with basically everything, every new job and everything new that I started, was that sense of complete incompetence when you began, but maybe a lot of passion and high expectations. Um, and as someone with a high level ambition and a passion to kind of engage in the world, I found myself um, trying a number of different career areas. And in my master's year, I did research in Trinity. I worked in community pharmacy practice with patients. And then I moved into a role in Johnson and Johnson, where I worked with their external affairs department for 6 months on big mental health projects and innovation in STEM areas. And then I moved to the innovation department then within Johnson and Johnson. And at a certain point through all this journey, I was feeling that I was kind of behind the curve of my peers because I had missed out on a year of college, and that I was behind. And so in many ways, I went into overdrive, and I went into this place of achievement, achievement, achievement. Um, and at a certain point, I realized that I was being driven by a desire to show people on the outside that maybe that Jack is okay after what's happened. Um, but at a certain point, I kind of had to look in the mirror and say, maybe Jack's not fully okay. And it started a bit of a journey of self-exploration. Um, and I studied coaching psychology, and then a few years later studied in the School of Positive Health in RCSI, which looks at mind body science and um, lifestyle medicine and sort of the science behind human flourishing. And we're going to explore a bit of that today, because all of those were pieces that I needed actually to navigate what I was experiencing in a healthier way. And I think that's kind of an important piece here, is that, people are remarkably resilient and remarkably adaptable and creative in the face of change, be it in the workplace or in their personal lives. But there's healthy adaptations and there's unhealthy adaptations. And there's ways that we adapt that serve us and ways that we adapt that bring us on a downward spiral. And And certainly, over the years, I have had maladaptive approaches at different times that led me to a place of burnout, and ultimately became um destructive in my life. And so, I suppose from where we started to where we are now, it was alluded to in the piece that Anthony wrote, read, but a lot of my work now is um, to do with health and well-being, and yes, the diversity and inclusion agenda, particularly focused on people with disabilities. Um, and I found myself working with the World Health Organization and a number of boards whilst running my own business. And so there's multiple pieces in the air, and that's true of all of us as adults. We think it's going to be a straight line from point A to point B, and wouldn't that be wonderful? But as a health professional, I know that on a heart rate monitor, going from one side of the screen to the other in a straight line is bad news. And so, really, the truth of life for all of us is the series of highs and lows on the heartbeat. And the sooner we recognize that and realize that we are always going to have competing demands and multiple things that we're juggling, and busy periods and lighter periods, the sooner that we can sort of realistically look at ways and strategies to more healthily manage all of that.
Jack, in relation to you alluded to burnout, there, like, this has become a sort of a really big issue for many people now. And the complexity of burnout is something we're going to talk about here today. But could you maybe share with us the contours of your own encounter with burnout so that the story may help others who are in the throes of this struggle?
Yeah, like when I reflect on it, there's probably periods during my college experience where I was burnt out. But I do have two distinct periods that I know. Um, I one in particular that was significant, but two that I will share. One was actually in one of the first roles that I had out of college, and I was studying and working at the same time, and there was like workload demands on me. But the piece that ultimately became very draining and led to some of the symptoms which we'll explore in a moment, that would mark burnout, was ultimately a values conflict with the environment that I was working in. And that's like where you get this internal rub that the values that are most important to you are in conflict with those that you see being demonstrated in the environment that you're working in. And that internal conflict can be incredibly emotionally draining. Um, and you get this sort of pull between your head and your heart, that is very tiring and takes a huge amount of your energy just to remain functioning in the environment. And so that was probably the first period, but the second period was much more insidious actually, and burnout is often this way. And it came towards the middle of the pandemic. And the interesting thing was that during the pandemic, I was very often being getting emails into my inbox saying, we'd love you to come and speak to our team or to work with our team on resiliency. And I felt like an absolute fraud a number of times because I was like everybody else going through this very discommoding and isolating at times and challenging period of COVID. And during that period, because lots of my um healthy adaptive strategies had been taken away from me, and we'll discuss those later, what they might look like in your own life, because my access to them had maybe been diminished or removed. Um, I turned to work to fill the time, and I worked more and more and more, and I was giving of myself a huge amount. Um, and at a certain point, I hit a wall that was very significant, and I had very little left to give, and I'd sit at the laptop for the day and get next to nothing done. I'd be beating myself up about it, and the spiral just continued. I'd feel emotionally detached from people that were close to me. And these are some of the things that really come up. And I think that was something that a lot of us encountered at different periods of the pandemic, whether it was in a professional context or in a personal context. Um, so it led me to go and explore, well, what might the antidote to some of this be? And what are some of the things that we can turn to navigate periods like that? And we're going to get in and hopefully add some value for those that are in attendance today.
So just one final question. Due to the nature of the work that we're both involved in, hidden disabilities such as neurodivergency is probably the most complex space in and challenging. And a lot of the time, people who are neurodivergent don't know they're burnt out or don't understand that. And like, is there anything you think you could share with us about how we could better support people like that?
Yeah, we might turn to this towards the end, actually, Declan, because
Yeah.
I think it's a question that we can dig into, and there's lots of individual variancy. And I think the thing with burnout, generally speaking, is that it is, I used the word insidious earlier, in that like it kind of creeps in and up on us. And and our awareness to it can often be um we can be very unaware of it until maybe someone points it out or we really hit the wall. Um so we might explore that
Yeah.
towards the end if that's all right.
That'd be great. So maybe if you want to kick off with your presentation, and we'll pick that up at the other end.
You tell me that you can see a bird on the screen.
I can.
Fantastic. So this bird is the canary bird, and in this photo, there's many unique things about the canary bird, but in this photo, we would say that the bird is looking, healthy and vibrant. It's in and of nature, and it's flourishing. And for every single one of us, there are a set of circumstances, or a window of tolerance that we have, circumstances and environments in which we too are healthy and we're vibrant, we're flourishing. Now, the interesting thing about the canary is um, that it's very sensitive to noxious gases. And back in the day, before they had carbon monoxide monitors and so on, the miners used to bring the canary bird down into the mines. And this is where the phrase the canary in the coal mine came from. And if we flip on to this next picture, we can see that both participants in this photo are jaded and they've lost their color and they're dulled to the world. And um, when the canary bird was brought down in the cage into the mines, um, when the bird stopped chirping and singing, the miners knew that it was time for them to get out of the environment as well, that it was unsafe for them, that it was outside of their window of tolerance, and that the environment wasn't conducive to human flourishing. So the question here is, where does the problem lie? Is the problem with the canary? Is it with the coal mine? Or is it with the context? And my assessment of this is that the problem is with the context. The canary has circumstances in which it flourishes. The coal mine is what it is. But the context is the problem. When the coal mine has gases in it and it's an unhealthy place for people to be, that's where the challenge arises. Now, as we mentioned, burnout has become a significant challenge in many industries. And they talk a huge amount about the person job fit, which is the context in the workplace. And we're going to get into that. But before we do, let's get a clearer picture as to what burnout actually is defined as. So this comes from the World Health Organization, and they say burnout is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. They say it's characterized by feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. They say that there's an increased or mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to the job. And here's the piece that really gets me. It's the reduced professional efficacy. But actually, the tide turns on yourself. So you have that reduced professional efficacy. And I used the phrase earlier that you're working hard, but it feels like it's hardly working. You might be putting more energy and effort in than normal, and you feel like you're just spinning your tires, like you're not getting anywhere. But here's where I disagree with the World Health Organization. They say that burnout refers specifically to phenomena in the occupational context and should not be applied to describe experiences in other areas of life. And I fundamentally disagree with that. And the reason that I disagree with that is life and work are very difficult to separate. You know, if things are going really well in work, um, it filters into our private life outside of work. If things are going really poorly in our workplace, it filters into our private life. And the same is true the other way around. If we're going through a really challenging period in our personal life, it filters and influences at work and vice versa as well. And so I think we need to consider burnout as a work-life issue in that it can apply in both personal and professional contexts. So let's dig a bit more into the symptoms that you might experience, because, you know, without awareness, we can't initiate change. Awareness always precedes change. And so some of the things that you might notice is that you're feeling tired or just drained a lot of the time, that you feel kind of helpless, trapped, or defeated by the environment that you're working in or the circumstances, that you feel a little bit detached or alone in the world. So what we find is called sickness-like behavior. And people, you know, when they feel overwhelmed by the circumstances, which burnout often leads to, you tend to retreat inward. And that can lead to you feeling a little bit detached or alone in the world. Um, that negative or cynical outlook that you develop on the situation, you know, when you're so jaded, just like the canary bird in the coal mine, when you're so jaded and the environment and the context or the circumstances feel like they're kind of trapping you or pushing you down, it is natural that we sort of feel a little bit threatened and we become cynical or have this negative outlook. And ultimately, we start doubting ourselves. It's that reduced professional efficacy or reduced personal efficacy. You know, if it's in a personal context, you feel that you're less able. And that might just be that you need to shift things up a bit. Um, Finally, that sense of overwhelm and procrastination, things are taking a little bit longer to get done, or they're being very much put on the long finger altogether. So these are some of the things that you might, if you go away from this session and you look in the mirror and you say, you know what, a number of these things are things that I've been experiencing. And it's not just like over a day or two, but like we're talking about this extending over 2, 3 weeks where these feelings are and experiences are not changing, but you're feeling these symptoms a lot of the time. So what are the things particularly in a job or a workplace context that will drive an individual towards burnout? Well, understandably, you've got the likes of work overload, you know, where there's just so much on your plate that it becomes overwhelming, you get exhausted, and it's difficult to see your way out of it. Another thing that is really a driver for burnout is this lack of clarity about the expectations or how you are being asked to deliver what you're to deliver in your role, but also a lack of control about how you deliver what you're being asked to do. Understandably, a feeling of insufficient rewards or that the rewards do not match what's been asked of you. A breakdown of community. So if you don't feel like you belong or are a part of the team, that can really leave us to feel isolated and detached in the workplace. And it makes some of what we have to engage with in the workplace more challenging. An absence of fairness. So if you see others in your team or your workplace being treated differently, for the positive, or being treated differently than yourself, or they're getting privileges that you're not getting, um, those things can really be drivers of burnout. And one that I mentioned that I experienced was a values conflict. And this one, it creates that internal tension where your head and your heart are pulling you maybe in different directions. You're finding it very difficult to be in the environment because the behaviors that you see maybe don't match up with the values that are espoused in the mission statement or the vision statement, or they misalign with your value set personally. And all of these things create what the Navy SEALs call a Vuka environment. So all of these things create a volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous environment. And all of these elements come together to drive stress. They drive low level stress and peak stress as well, and put us on this cortisol and adrenaline, um, um, a high level of sort of circulating adrenaline and cortisol, or our adrenal system begins to work on overdrive when we're in environments that are always volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous. And so it's no wonder that you begin to get worn out. It's just like a car. If you're driving a car and you're on the accelerator all the time, which is what stress is, it's stressing the car and the engine. It's inevitable that it goes into the red zone and it starts to break down over time. So when we're in the workplace, one of the things that people often think is that it must be just jobs that have very high demands on them that are drivers of stress, that are drivers of burnout. And actually, that is not what the research finds. Really, if you look at this graph that we've got here, um, what we see is that a job that is considered to have low demands on us and where we have low control over how we do what we do, um, that is called a passive role or a passive job. And really, we don't want that in the workplace. A passive role or job doesn't challenge us in any way. It doesn't ask much of us. We don't feel like we're growing or developing. And those are really important parts of human flourishing. A sense of progress is really what we're after in terms of our skills and the things that we're learning and contributing to. That's in the bottom left corner, so passive. In the blue zone, we have low strain. So we've got a high level of control over how we do what we do, but there's not a huge amount of demands on us. And so that's not very strenuous on us, and it's easy enough for us to manage that. Down in the bottom right, in the orange zone, we've got high strain. That's where we've got high demands, so there's a lot being asked of us, but we've got very, very little control about how we do what we do. This is going to be important for the next graph I show you. That low control and high demands. That orange zone is the area we want to avoid. That's the area that it predisposes us towards stress, and it predisposes us towards burnout. But actually, the green zone, where you've got high demands on you, so you've a huge amount being asked of you, but you've got lots of control about how you deliver what you've been asked to deliver, that's an active zone. And that is very fulfilling for us. That's where we're being stretched, yes, but we've got control about how we deliver what we're been asked to do. And that is very growth enhancing, and it helps us to become energized, and we feel, as I said, fulfilled and energized about what we're doing. And we're in a growth zone there, and it's called an active stance in the workplace. So with this understanding of demands and control and how it might influence stress, let's take a look at the levels of burnout that are being experienced in the world at the moment. So this data actually is from last year, and it looks at managers' burnout rates by generation. And what you might be surprised to see is just how high burnout is in the younger generations compared to the more mature in our world. And this is specifically in the workplace, but I want to explain this graph by telling the story of what else is happening here. So if you take Gen Z, and this is last year's data, so at the moment they are 12 to 27. So if we take kind of the working age of 18 to 27 for Gen Z, they've got a 34% annualized rate of burnout. So out of 100 people in that age category, 34 of them will every year experience a period of burnout. Now, what are some of the driving forces behind this? So we looked at the control and stress piece in a moment ago, and I'll come back to that just in a second. But for a moment, if you think about when you were in primary school, you got to sixth class in primary school and you thought you were the king of the castle, that you had it all figured out. And then you went into first year of secondary and you became humbled. You became humbled and you realize, really, I've got nothing figured out. I'm at ground zero again. You get to sixth year in secondary school, and again, you've got it all figured out. And then you enter into first year college, and once again, you're humbled and you're starting from scratch and figuring it all out again. You get to the end of college years if you choose to go to college. And again, now you've got a professional qualification or you've got a degree under your belt. And certainly at this point, you're ready to launch into your career and you have it figured out and you're ready to go. And just like my experience, you get into your first job out of college and you realize that you're largely incompetent, that you're starting from scratch, and that there's so much job specific information and context that you need to learn, that you're at ground zero. But what else is happening for this generation is that they're digital natives. They're digital natives that spend their days seeing highlight reels, whether it's on Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. They're seeing the highlight moments of all of the people around them and people around the world. They believe that most of their friends are living in Bali teaching yoga. And so when they enter into the workplace, their expectations as to what they might be able to achieve in year 1 or 2 are met with reality. They realize that they're largely incompetent, as we said, and that they're starting all over again. And the interesting thing here is that their competence is low, and the level of control they often have over how they deliver what they deliver is also low. But they're very ambitious and they're passionate and they want to get involved. And that mismatch in expectations versus reality is one of the big drivers of burnout rates in this generation. Their aspirations and expectations about what they can do and where they can go is streets ahead of what they experience in their reality day to day. And a recalibration of that expectation level is really important to sort of fend against burnout, and so that they can be grounded in their reality and actually engage in that reality. So there's some of the driving factors: low competence, high expectations, and so we see 34% of them annually burning out. Then we look at the millennials, and millennials have 42%. So what else is going on for a millennial? So they're currently 27, 28 to 42, 43 age bracket. Well, in the workplace, those might be the years where you take on a little bit more responsibility. You might get a promotion. They might be the years where you begin to manage some other people. Um, and so the pressures inside of work increase a little bit as your role demands increase. But outside of the workplace, they're also the years where people If they're in a relationship, they may decide to move in with a partner or to get married. If they choose to have children, they might happen during those years. They're also the years where you might choose to, move into a bigger place and to try and get a mortgage. And so all of that is happening during those years of sort of late 20s to early 40s. Increased workplace demands and increased demands, particularly financially and on your time if you have kids outside of the workplace. What else is happening in the world though? This data is 2023 data. We had a housing crisis and certainly inflation going through the roof, and which led to a cost of living crisis. And so during those pinch years that millennials are living through at the moment, it's understandable that 42% of them on an annualized basis would be experiencing a period of burnout. But the further on you go, then Gen X and the baby boomers who are more progressed in their careers, the kids are growing up. They might never move out with the housing crisis, but they are growing up and they're maybe marginally more self-sufficient. And as you move further on in your career as well, in those Gen X and baby boomer years, you have an increased level of confidence in your competence. The further up the chain you go in the workplace as well, you have more agency or control about how you deliver the work you're being asked to deliver. And so that puts you more into an active or green zone type role. And they're also the years where you're earning more. And so in relation to the pressures of mortgages and things like that, you begin to have a little bit more breathing room during those years as mortgage repayments and things like that diminish. Although you may have some additional costs, and you may and are likely earning a bit more the further you go into your career. So we see the burnout rates gradually begin to decrease as people increase in agency in how they deliver what they deliver later in their careers. So the question then becomes, where does the responsibility lie? Is it with the individual or is it with the institution that they work in? Well, there's a two-way contract here. When an individual joins a company, they sign a contract and they say, this is the job spec, and I agree to give my best, the best of myself to deliver on what has been asked with me within these hours and with certain parameters around that, reasonable expectations, and the institution has a responsibility towards the individual to say, we're going to treat you fairly, we're going to pay you fairly, we're going to give you appropriate holiday leave, and we're going to create an environment that is safe and healthy for you to work in. And these are the hours and, all of those kinds of things. And so it's a two-way street. But for the remainder of this session, I'm not going to focus on the institution. Rather, I want to focus on what are the things within the individual's control, things that you can put into action and have a think about in your own life. So earlier on, I gave you the analogy of the heartbeat. If we go from one side of the screen to the other in a straight line on a heart rate monitor, it's not good news. And actually, the thing that makes us all more similar than we are different is that we share the heartbeat. And the heartbeat's full of highs and lows, and it continues forever. And this is highs and lows personally and professionally. And so, all of those things, particularly the lower points, require a level of resiliency from us. Particularly those lower points drive stress because they often feel volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous. So we look at resiliency, and this comes from the American Psychological Association, and they define resilience as being, successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences. It's having the mental, the emotional, and behavioral flexibility and ability to adjust to both internal and external demands. So the internal demands might be the beliefs or the expectations we have, the emotions, the challenging emotions we experience. For example, are the stories we're telling ourselves about a situation, and the external demands are what they are. There's four different types of resiliency in my eyes, and we have the psychological or the mental resiliency piece, you know. So these are the mindset that we take, the belief systems that we adopt, the stories that we choose to tell ourselves about circumstances. Then we have the emotional resiliency, you know, like we have a full range of emotions, and denying ourselves of the hard emotions is really unhealthy for us. And we have to allow the tougher emotions that come with certain scenarios to be processed, but to do it in as healthy a way as we can. Then we've got physical resilience, you know, that's our physical well-being and our health. And some of the things that happen when we begin to get burned out is it affects our sleep, and it affects our, you know, if we're not sleeping, our body begins to break down and we start picking up coughs and colds, and you know, we're lethargic and jaded, so we're less likely to do the exercise that might be good for us, and some of these kinds of things. And then we've got community or spiritual resilience, and community is about the people that are around us, and the spiritual resilience is about, you know, I have a fundamental connection to something that's bigger than me. For some people, that will be a community. For some people, it'll be a religion, and it looks different in different ways. So, in my eyes, resiliency is about healthy regulation. Our nervous system, it has two sides. It has the sympathetic, which, as we said, is like the accelerator in the car, and it has the parasympathetic, which is like the brake. It's like the brake or the clutch that allows us to slow down a little bit or to change gears. The Stoics are often thought of when the Stoic philosophers, when people talk about, you know, mindset and resiliency. And the core thing that the Stoics really focused on is having a look at what are the things in my life that are within or outside of my control, and focusing on the things that are within your control, and really not putting too much of your focus or your energy on the things that are outside of your control. And I love this quote. It says, "The chief task in life is simply this, to identify and separate matters so I can clearly say to myself, which are externals not under my control and which have to do with the choices I actually control. Where then do I look to for good and evil, not to the uncontrollable externals, but within myself to the choices that are my own." So we're going to take a look at some of those choices now. This is a question that I would love for you all to answer, and maybe some of you can share some of the things you come up with in the chat box. But take this question down and spend 5 minutes on it after the call. What makes me come alive? Now, coming alive will mean something slightly different to everybody. But the answers you get to this question are going to be really important and really helpful in helping you to more healthily manage and regulate the stressful experiences that you have, which may be leading towards or tending you towards burnout. So I'd like you to think about the people, the places, and the experiences that make you feel alive. Like feeling alive for some people will be like in this picture, you know, a moment of joy or excitement, or being on the edge of something, of your seat, or an exciting experience. For other people, it will be feeling calm and safe and serene and more restful and relaxed. But make a list and try to put 10 things on this list. Remember, people, places, and experiences. And I'm going to explain some of the things that often come up. What we know is in the field of positive psychology, which really studies, you know, what are the circumstances that lead to people thriving in life. They talked a lot about PermaH. And actually, there's a new model they call PermaH. So PermaH is a standardized way that they can assess people's well-being or level of flourishing. And the things that really impact on people's well-being, not just that they're fine, but they're actively well in life, is that they have people, places, and experiences that bring them positive emotion. Not always big peaks of positive emotion, but the stable, low positive emotion, the the cup of coffee with a friend, the walking the dog on the beach, playing in the garden with the kids. They're small moments, reading a book in front of a fire, going to the cinema and seeing a great movie. Um, that feeling of being on the plane on your way on holidays and the anticipation and excitement. They're these kinds of moments in our lives. It's being at the top of the mountain and having the view into the distance. Any of these kinds of things, however you describe them in your own life. So positive emotion is important. Engagement is important. So having activities or experiences in your life, be it in or out of the workplace, that make you feel engaged. And what they're really talking about here is flow. So the experiences that make you lose track of time and where time just fades away into the distance and you're totally immersed in the moment. The relationships in our life. So, you know, having people that we can celebrate with on the good days and people that will pick us up on the tough days. These close relationships, having about 5 close relationships in your life is a huge predictor for the level of health that we'll have, and how optimistic we are about the future and the level of satisfaction we experience in our lives. Meaning. So you can derive meaning in your life in or out of work, but having a think about do I find some of the things that I'm engaged with in life meaningful? And that can be very protective for burnout and in the face of stress and challenging experiences. And here they say achievement. The A stands for achievement, but really what they're talking about here is not getting to the end of a goal. It's really about progress and that sense of progress and moving towards something. It's the growth or learning something new that we mentioned earlier. The final piece of the newer model of this is H, which is for health or vitality. And it's that physical well-being that we're going to look at next. So accompanying PermaH is lifestyle medicine. And these are some of the things that are really important in terms of being protective for our well-being. So healthy eating and exercise, sleep, positive social connections, minimizing risky substances. Because we know that when stress comes on, it's really easy to binge watch TV, or it's really easy to go to the casino, or to have an extra glass of wine, or any number of other substances you could use. And they're great ways in the short term of managing stress, but they lead us down a really bad spiral over time. And so all of these things on the screen allow you to more healthily manage stress, but they do require work. And they require work, which is really important because it becomes a reinforcing piece that you have a better self-identity and when you put in the work and commit something to doing something positive for yourself or constructive for yourself. So all of us have these competing demands. We've got different rocks in different parts of our lives, and things can get a little bit out of balance sometimes. If you feel that you're being predisposed towards burnout, some of the answers that you got to that question in terms of what makes me come alive, people, places, and experiences, putting those people going putting in regular meeting up and time with those people, regularly going to those places that make you feel alive, and regularly engaging with the experiences that make you feel alive will help to restore a little bit more balance in your life and help you more healthily manage the things that can predispose us towards burnout. However, two big factors that I think are important is to set boundaries. So in our lives, be it in the workplace or personally, we do need to set boundaries that that are healthy for us as well as for the people around us. We can't be giving of ourselves all of the time. We need space to replenish and restore. And there's some days where you just need to breathe. Um, Towards the end of the session, before we go to questions, I would ask you to have a think about these three questions. You know, what keeps me on track? And I think a lot of the answers that you'll get to the question of what makes me come alive, those people on that list, those places on that list, and those experiences on that list, they're some of the answers to what keeps me on track. Have a think about what derails me in the workplace or outside of work. And if there's between 1 to 3 commitments that you would make to yourself about the small things you could do that would help you a little bit more quickly get back on track, because we all fall off it sometimes when we feel the demands are great on us, where we feel that values conflict, where we feel an absence of fairness. You know, all of these things can lead us to detach, to go inward, and ultimately drive us towards a sense of burnout. Over the years, the biggest thing that I have learned in answering these questions is that the further we move from nature, the sicker we become. Just like the canary in the coal mine, it's important for us to be aware of the environments we're in and to regularly come up for air. We're very open to questions, so I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and welcome Declan back in.
Thanks,
So
Jack.
Declan.
That was absolutely riveting. Very interesting analysis of burnout and what we need to do. And it's funny, as some of the questions that are coming in, we'll go to those in a minute, but it's about that openness, about the conversations. People are not very honest here. I think there's a lot of challenges, particularly in the workplace, where people, by admission of burnout, they're sort of stating some type of weakness or mental health challenge, which the workplace needs to look at a bit more. So the institutional side of this does need to take this stuff seriously. Like, one of the questions, I'll just throw it at you now, is about how do you, this is from Kira, it's in relation to what I was just saying there about how do you have a discussion with senior managements if they're really from the baby boomers and the burnout rates are considerable in Gen Z and the millennials. And how do you make the case to get burnout recognized as a real issue to a generation in charge who may not believe in it due to the never experiencing it? Or what do you think?
Yeah, so look, many of the baby boomers and the Gen X's grew up in periods of massive growth economically, you know. They grew up through you know, the 90s, the 80s and 90s, and those years where Ireland in particular went on a journey of being quite prosperous, but they have lived through the economic downturn as well, and the stresses and strains that came with that. And I think it's only in the more recent years, in the last 10 years or so, that we have started having conversations around mental health and around, you know, people's well-being and so on. There was a great sense of just roll up your sleeves and get on with it, you know, shut up and show up. And people are maybe recognizing that, hey, you know what, that may not be quite as acceptable anymore. And people vote with their feet and they get up and they leave a lot more quickly now. One of the other things I think to note is there's a significant difference, particularly in the last 12 years or so, is that the levels of information coming at us all of the time now are can be very overwhelming. Um, you know, there was a funny meme I saw not too long ago that said, sorry I didn't get back to you. Yeah, sorry I didn't get back to you. I have a brain that was designed for finding nuts in a forest, and I'm just trying to deal with all of the world's information at once. Um, and the thing is like I think I saw a recent research piece that said that on average we on a daily basis, with the level of information coming at us through our screens, we see about the equivalent of 147 newspapers worth of information, which is remarkable, you know. And so it's understandable that people are overwhelmed, and maybe the older generations aren't having to navigate that sort of all of that, plus the establishing of a career and an understanding that you know, it may be reasonably manageable to navigate that territory if you've got agency and control about your work and how you do it, and you've got, you know, all the connections to answer the questions that you don't have the answers to in your professional circle, which is more developed at that stage. And you know, you're also not as worried about making rent or these kind of pieces that are genuine concerns for the younger generations, and that you're not being bombarded every single day by like the two people out of 100 that you know that are in Bali and living an incredibly insecure life as a yoga instructor, but making out that everything is fine and rosy. And so like these are real things. And you know, it is a difficult conversation with more senior leadership, but maybe having that's where sort of choice of workplace comes in as well, you know.
So
And
just maybe connected to that, Jack, Brian asked the question about what sort of traits or practices leaders can use to embody and create an environment that supports mental health and prevents burnout among team members. Is there something missing here?
well, we know that um psychological safety is the grounding piece for so much of this. You know, it's not just in high performing teams that people have psychological safety, but psychological safety is, you know, is essentially an environment where it's okay to put your hand up and say, I've made a mistake, number one, or, you know, I'm struggling with all of the demands that I'm experiencing at the moment, and we might need to look at my workload, or I might need a later start so I can drop the kids off and not be fueled entirely by adrenaline trying to get across the city to be in work at 9. Whatever it is, a psychologically safe environment will allow you to have some of those types of conversations without the fear of the repercussions of, you know, is my role going to be in jeopardy here? Or am I going to be negatively thought of, or is my risk of promotion going to be, or am I at risk of diminishing my potential for promotion and so on? So I think psychological safety and is the cornerstone of it. A huge component of that is I think emotional intelligence, and that's something that there's skill sets that can be learned there, but a fundamental piece of it is, you know, and I think it was Simon Sinek that said this, and I might not get the quote right. He said, you know, your role as a leader is not just to be in charge, but to care for those in your charge. And I think that shift is really important. I'm looking at a book on my shelf here called Care to Dare. You know, if you want the people within your organization to put themselves on the line and to deliver their best work, you have to care about them first. Um, so I think that's a really important place to start, is to care about them as human beings to begin.
Thank you, Jack. There is other questions in there, but I don't think we have time. We've just run out of time and people are going to be leaving us. So I just wanted to thank you again for that riveting conversation, and I'll hand over to Anthony.
Perfect. Thank you both, Jack and Declan, for such a fascinating webinar. I think you've definitely given us a lot to think about, not to mention some key areas where we can start to be more aware of around burnout and resilience in our own lives. So thank you for that. We're delighted you could speak to us today, and thank you so much for being generous with your time and expertise. I'd also like to thank my colleagues in the alumni office for making today's webinar possible. And of course, thanks to our fantastic audience for joining us today and asking those questions. One of the great things about these webinars is the ability to engage with each other and ask questions. And it's brilliant to see the interest and enthusiasm. I just share my screen for the next webinar coming up. So we hope you'll be able to join us again next month as Inspiring Ideas Trinity webinar series. Welcomes Ryan Baird and Joe McCarthy of Leinster and Ireland Rugby. And the host will be Robert Brophy, former CFO of World Rugby, as they discuss the business of professional sport, reflection on a year in Irish rugby. Details on how to register for the next webinar will be sent via email and posted to social media in the coming weeks. If you have any questions or comments regarding this webinar series or any other questions you'd like to ask us here in the alumni office, please email us at alumni@tcd.ie. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again next month.